Good morning, amazing aviators. Welcome to another video here on the AviationPro channel. Welcome to the PMDG Boeing 737 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's finally out, an aircraft we've been waiting for a very long time. It's been in development for a very long time, way longer than it was anticipated to be, but it's finally out. And in this video I'm going to give you a review of it. We're going to explore the aircraft in detail, both inside and out. We're going to of course look at the systems and how it performs at the manual flying, how it performs in the new simulator, and just explore it in detail. Now a bit of a disclaimer before I start. I'm not a real-world Boeing 737 pilot. I am, however, a real-world student pilot at the moment, and of course I've been in this flight simulation world for almost 15 years, flying also other PMDG aircraft in the past. So in this review my aim is to really give you kind of a balanced perspective from the realism perspective, but also from the simmer's perspective. Alright, if you want a bit more detail on the Boeing 737 specifics, there are some channels linked in the description that you can check out of real-world 737 pilots. They will give you even better view of the 737 specific things and how it performs and how the automation performs. So you can purchase the PMDG Boeing 737-700 variant currently on the PMDG website. The link is in the description. It's currently available for a discount price of $69.99 US. It will increase to $74.99 US when the 600 variant is going to be released. And it's a bit of a different purchasing scheme than we are used to from PMDG. Whereas in previous simulators you would have to buy a base package and then expansion packages, you can now buy each variant separately. So currently the 700 version is available, and then later on during the summer of 2022 other variants are going to be released of the NG series and eventually also the 737 MAX at some point in the future. Now the aircraft is sort of in an early access. The PMDG headmaster Robert Rendezzo didn't really call it that way. I'm not sure what he actually called it, some sort of early adopters phase or something. And basically it means that the aircraft is ready, but there are some things missing. We'll explore that in detail in this review. But there are just some things that due to simulator limitations and due to the development of Microsoft Flight Simulator itself, some things will come later, like the EFB, for example, is a big point, and also the weather radar. But you get the functional aircraft, but just know that some features that you may be used to from, for example, Prepared are still not there, but it will come in the future. So it's kind of an early adopters phase, but if you buy the aircraft, you will get a fully functional 737 in the basic sense. So without further ado, let's take a look at the aircraft. Again, you can use the timestamps in the description if you want to skip forward to certain parts. And first of all, we'll start with the exterior. Now, as you can see, the exterior just looks fine. It looks amazing in the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. The simulator, of course, provides developers with plenty of capabilities in order to really show off the aircraft, and PMDG did just a fine job with that, showing off the 737. The modeling looks nice, the texturing looks nice. I mean, you can see the reflections on the aircraft. It's just amazing, really. Now if we look a little bit more detail, you can see here the wings, you can see the flight control movements. They're maybe not the smoothest movements that maybe can be achieved. PMDG is not really a company that really focuses on the exterior model for obvious reasons, but I think it's just fine. You can see here the rudder and the elevator movement, and also the flap movement. I mean, it's fine. It's maybe not the smoothest details, but it just looks quite genuine. Now if we take a look a little bit closer at some detail, for example the gear bay, the wheel well, you can actually see the texturing is not that good. That's something they're going to be working on. They're going to be releasing more detailed textures for this part and maybe for some other parts as well. Again, that's just part of being in this early adopters phase. Personally, I'm just not really bothered by that. I don't really look at the exterior model that much. This is really an aircraft designed to be flown from the inside. But in the basic sense, you can do a nice walk around. You can just, as you see some of the details on the gears, and in general the aircraft just looks fine. Now if you pay attention to some of the details, you can see some very nice stuff. Of course the engines produce heat, so you can also see the heat waves also from the APU in the tail when it's running. And when you get full power on takeoff, you can actually see the elevators or the stabilizers to be exact, shake, and it's very realistic. If you've ever been spotting, you can actually see that happening. So that's some very nice attention to detail. Now, of course, the aircraft comes with different variants. If you buy the 700, it comes with the 700 passenger version, the BDSF version, which is just a converted freighter version, and of course the Boeing business jet, also known as BBJ. So those are the main three models that you get when you purchase this aircraft. And within the models, there's also variants depending on which livery you are using, with winglets or split skimmeter winglets. Alright, so there's not a no winglet version available at the moment, but of course you can select different liveries that use the different types of winglets. So here's an example of the BDSF version, the converted freighter version. As you can see, the windows have been removed, and yeah, it just looks nice. You can see that's really a cargo version. And here's an example of the BBJ, the Boeing business jet with split skimmeter winglets. And I have to say, those winglets look very, very cool. And as you can see, it looks like a true business jet. And yeah, if you want to fly that version, you can do that as well. Now with the exterior model, you can also do some nice customizations. You can call up ground vehicles when you're on the ground, like catering services, cleaning services, fuel truck, the passenger bus, the cargo loading and unloading. So that's very nice. You can do that from within the cockpit using the FMC and the FS Actions menu. And as you can see, this is what it looks from the outside. You can really make it kind of more lively on the ground when you are loading the aircraft with fuel and payload. You can also, there's some attention to details, like the Wi-Fi antenna. You can select it within the options in the FMS, whether your aircraft needs to have a Wi-Fi antenna or not. So as you can see, it just looks very nice. You can really make the aircraft come to life using these options and vehicles. Now, through the PMDG Operations Center, you can install different liveries, and in the meantime, if people release liveries on websites like flightsim.to, you can also install them through the Operations Center. So here are some examples of different liveries. As you can see from the outside, it just looks amazing as well. Very realistic, sometimes hard to distinguish whether it's real or not. And here you see the Aeromexico livery with gear extending, so you can kind of see how that animation looks. So in general, the exterior is just fine. Again, maybe if you look at details, things might look a bit blurry. Textures are not as crisp as you may be used to for some other aircraft, but it's just fine. I mean, it looks just amazing. Viewing it from the outside with the reflections, the way the lights reflect on the aircraft and during different situations, during different times of day, with different types of weather. The aircraft and the model just makes full use of all the possibilities that Microsoft Flight Simulator offers. So in general, you will be very pleasantly surprised with the exterior model and texturing. And talking about night, let's take a look at what the aircraft looks like at night or at dusk. As you can see, just very nice reflections of the lights. Here's an example of the landing lights. As you can see, nice LED lights that are lighting up the aircraft. Of course, within the options, as I will explore in more detail later, you can actually select the different types of landing lights. So here are the old style landing lights that are extending, and as you can see, how it reflects on the ground and how it reflects on the aircraft itself. It just looks amazing, very realistic. So let's explore the most important part, which is obviously the interior of the aircraft. And let's start with the cockpit and just let the images speak for itself. As you can see, it just looks amazing. PMDG did a really good job at recreating the Boeing 737 cockpit in great detail, exploiting all the features that Microsoft Flight Simulator offers. It just looks amazing. Now the modeling is correct as far as I'm concerned. Having seen real 737 cockpits, it's just amazing. Very much attention to detail. The texturing is really well done, very sharp and crisp. As you can see, the knobs and switches, the way the displays reflect, the way even the small displays of the MCP reflect, there's just not a lot to say about it. It's just fantastic, to be honest. And the movement of the switches and the way the warning lights up, it just looks very genuine, very realistic indeed. Now here are some movements of the flap handles, the throttles, etc. You can see how it moves. Now here, as you can see, is the yoke movement. It's not the smoothest movement, but yeah, it's fine. It just does its job, and the yoke itself looks very realistic. And yeah, it's just you will definitely feel at home in this cockpit. You know, in different situations, you can see in rainy conditions the cockpit looks different. It just reflects the light of the environment very accurately. So right here in the rain you can see that the cockpit is a bit darker, but when you fly in bright daylight the cockpit is a lot brighter. And you know, that's what I really like about the simulator. You can really immerse yourself in different scenarios, in different weather scenarios, at different times of day. And the way the cockpit looks really reflects that time of day and really reflects the type of weather that you're flying in. So that's very nice. Let's take a look at a little bit more detail on the display. As you can see, you can zoom in all the way. It just looks very, very crisp. You will not have a problem reading the displays and getting information from them. Just very, very nice. Now as you can see, the seats look a bit funny. There's a nice sheep furry coat. That's so classic for the 737. It sits really comfortably in real life, but as you can see in the sim, the way it's being rendered, it looks a little bit weird. Maybe that's just because I'm using only a 1080p screen. Maybe it looks better in 4K, I'm not sure. But the way the sim renders that, it looks a bit fluffy, kind of like the clouds sometimes look. But it's not a really huge problem. It looks, in general very nice. But when you move the armrest, like here, you can actually see some sort of rendering going on in the background, where it kind of looks like you're in the Twilight Zone sometimes. But yeah, it's that's only a minor issue. I don't think you'll be bothered by that in general. It just comes with a lot of detail, and the way the sim renders that detail is just a little bit funny sometimes, but that's fine. So as you can see, the wipers also are active. Unfortunately, sim limitation does not allow them to actually wipe rain from the cockpit, so that's something that hopefully will be released in the future. The windows cannot be opened. That's a bit of a pity. I think they will add that in the future as well, but for now you cannot open the windows. And you can move the armrests, and also the jump seat. You can actually open up the jump seat and also stow it back in. And as you can hear and see, the movements of that are very nice. You can have a third visitor in the cockpit. Now again, the cockpit door itself can also not be opened. If you want to view the cabin, you will have to do that from the drone camera. Another thing that I really like is that you can actually see the wing from the cockpit. That's very nice. You can actually just put your face up to the window and you can actually zoom in on the wing view. That's very realistic. You can actually see the wing from the aircraft in real life. So maybe that way you just want to check for some wing eyes, or maybe just get some nice cinematic footage of the wing itself. It can all be done thanks to this feature. But when it does rain, as you can see, it just looks amazing. Again, fully exploiting all the features that come with Microsoft Flight Simulator. The reflections, the way the lights reflect on the raindrops. Yeah, I know. It just looks amazing. Honestly, it looks so realistic. So maybe it's not even that bad that the wing or that the wipers cannot wipe the rain from the window. It just kind of looks very good on the cockpit windows. Again, it really adds to the atmosphere of the cockpit. You really feel that you're inside the 737 cockpit and that you're actually flying the aircraft, so you will definitely enjoy that. And this is what the cockpit looks like at night. As you can see, again, just amazing attention to detail. It looks so realistic. Just let the images speak for itself again. Now you can adjust the lights inside the cockpit. I've tried, I think, most of the light switches and they all work. Just brilliant, really. Whereas in prepared, things would kind of get stuttery sometimes when you adjust things like the floodlights or something like that. That doesn't happen in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can just adjust the floodlights and the dim switches and the instrument lights and the backlights without any cost of performance, and it just looks amazing. As you can see here, I'm in the air using the dome light, and the way the dome light mixes with the floodlights and the instrument lights, it's just incredible, extremely realistic. PMDG has done a good job at recreating the looks of the 737 cockpit at night, and it just again adds to this immersion factor. Yeah, so just make sure that you play around with all the light switches. You will be really amazed. Of course, you can also adjust the displays and the brightness of them. Let's take a look at a little bit more detail right here on the throttle quadrant. As you can see, when you do a fire test and where the parking brake is set, you can really see how the red light of those reflects on all the objects around. Just absolutely stunning. and in general, yeah, the way the things reflect on each other and how it all combines with the different lights as you use different light spots that are inside the cockpit really is extremely realistic and making full use of all the things that Microsoft Flight Simulator has to offer. So PMDG has done a great job at recreating the cockpit both in daylight and nighttime conditions. Now the aircraft also comes with a cabin. Unfortunately, you cannot really access that from the interior. You would have to use the drone camera in order to access the cabin. So as you can see, you can actually fly through the cabin a little bit. It's not the most detailed cabin. Again, that's something that you're going to be working on and improving on texturing. But you can actually explore the aircraft that way. If you move into the cockpit, as you can see, it kind of switches back and forth between this exterior cockpit view and also the interior cockpit view, the way it should look. So it's a bit funny the way that works. It's just how Microsoft Flight Simulator works. Now in the drone mode or the showcase mode, you can actually go to some fixed cameras to also get wing views. And as you can see, those wing views also kind of have the window element attached to it. So it's really like you view it from the cabin. Unfortunately, you cannot really view any other things from here. You cannot move the camera in the fixed camera option. Maybe some people will actually create some more customized wing views for even more, ways of viewing the wing from the cabin, but there are a couple of cameras providing you with some very nice wing views. So yeah, and the way the wing views look just during daytime and nighttime, I mean, sometimes I cannot really tell the difference whether I'm looking at a real picture or in a picture from Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's just the way it looks is just amazing, with the scenery in the background, with the clouds, and the way the lights reflect at night, and also the moon reflects on the wings. Just things like that, extremely realistic. Again, you can just see how that looks in different scenarios right here. So let's take a look at all the systems that we can find on the airplane. I'm just going to give you a general overview of the overhead panel and then explore other systems as we go. Now, basically all the systems that you can find on the overhead panel are simulated with great detail and great accuracy. Alright, it's a PMDG aircraft. If you're not familiar with PMDG really simulates these kind of systems with great accuracy, going as far as fluid dynamics, the temperature of the fuel, the hydraulics, the residual temperature of the engine after the engine stops after a flight. All of these kinds of little details are taken into account in the simulation, and this just really adds to the overall very accurate system simulation. Alright, so all the systems that you can find on the overhead panel, like the fuel, the hydraulics, the air conditioning, the electrical systems, they all work like they should work as in the real airplane. Any 737 pilot will be able to tell you that. Alright, so you can perform a flight from A to B using all those systems very accurately. And even when, for example, simulating failures, you can just take the QRH next to you and adjust the system accordingly in order to solve the problem that you're facing. All the systems respond accordingly, and just doing failure simulation with all these systems that work accurately makes the airplane very realistic. And of course, all of this adds to the immersion factor. So when you, for example, right here, turn off the fuel cutoff switches and you forgot to turn on the APU generator when you parked at the gate, you will see that the aircraft will shut down and lose its power, run on battery power, the lights switch on, and you have to, of course, manually in this aircraft select the APU again. But also small little details like hearing the fuel pumps and hydraulic pumps in the background. Seeing all those values displayed on the multifunction display during different phases of flight. Yeah, it's all simulated in great detail. So in general, you'll have a great time exploring this aircraft. The 737 is a bit of an old airplane and it needs to be handled with care, and you will find all of that out when you actually use the PMDG Boeing 737. So let's take a look at a little bit more detail in regards to some of the other systems. The aircraft also comes with a head-up display or head-up guidance system. You can check that in the FMS options whether you want to have that installed for your particular livery. And as you can see, this is what it looks like. For some reason it was kind of flickering for me. I'm not sure why. I tried to adjust the refresh rate of the head-up display, but it didn't really solve the problem. So maybe that's something they have to look at. But you can use the HUD this way. It looks very realistic. All the information is there portrayed for you like it's done on the real aircraft. Now, two things that are missing in regards to systems that will also kind of disappoint prepared users being used to the NGXu in prepared version 4 or 5 is obviously the weather radar and the EFB. The weather radar is not implemented yet. They have to wait on a SOBO to open up the weather API for that. So that is a bit of a bummer. I really like using the weather radar, especially in combination with live ATC on VETS. We can really fly around thunderstorms, things like that. So that's a bit of a pity. There's a sentence in the manual which says that they are going to implement that if and when a SOBO fixes this issue. So it's not a really comforting little line in the manual there. I really do hope they actually will implement the weather radar at some point, but it's going to take some time. The EFB will definitely be implemented though. It will be more of an iPad style EFB than we're used to from PMDG, so it will be an entirely new EFB. I have to be a bit honest here. I'm really kind of surprised that it was not included in the initial release. Again, this is just part of being in the early adopters phase of this product. But you know, if a freeware Airbus can have it, you know, in a kind of an EFB to load up fuel, to customize some of the systems, I mean, yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed that it was not included in the initial release, especially in regards to being able to do things like takeoff calculations for the FMC. It's kind of necessary at this point. A lot of add-ons have it, and now you need to use something like TopCat in order to do accurate takeoff performance and landing performance calculations. We cannot do that right now because the EFB is missing. So unfortunately the weather radar is inoperative. There is a terrain display though, and so you can actually view the terrain. Of course, on the navigation display you can also view all kinds of nav aids, airports, according to the nav data. The nav data is updatable using Navigraph if you want to. So that is all in place. It's just a shame that the weather radar itself is not working. And of course you can actually also see traffic when you're flying online using the TCAS system. You will actually be able to see all that traffic on your display. Now of course the PMDG 737 can be customized a lot depending on what your airline uses. You can just change a lot of things, be it display settings, having a checklist on the yoke. As you can see, I'm adjusting some of the settings here. You can change the MCP. There are so many options, landing lights, the type of landing lights, the type of fuel cutoff switches. So you can really customize the way you want it to be. And also when you install liveries through the operation center, some liveries come with accurate settings for that airline already. If you want a bit more detail, I really recommend watching the PMDG video on the PMDG YouTube channel, which goes a bit more in depth of all the options and what they exactly do. But just know it's out there. There's a lot of customization possible from within the setup menu. Now within that there's also a nice failure menu. You can literally simulate a lot of failures. You can arm them, you can make them active instantly. As you can see, I'm here just failing some terrain system and some displays. This is where the accuracy of the system modeling comes in. You know, if a certain display becomes ineffective or stops working, you can use other displays to view that information, and all the knobs and switches to do that and to switch displays actually work. Alright, so those kind of things are just very nice. You can feel the GPS, you can feel the IRS system. Just so many options that you can simulate. Probably not something to use for your type rating, but if you want to kind of practice with that anyway, you can do it through all the failure options right here. Okay, so that's just really cool. A little quirk with the failures is that you can also get at service-based failures, and basically what this is going to do is it's going to introduce a failure at some random point in time depending on how much you use the aircraft. Now these failures rarely occur in real life, and so they will also not very often occur in your simulator flights, but you can enable them. Maybe you will face some sort of scenario at some point, some sort of random failure, and then you better get your cure rates ready in order to solve the problem. Now of course the aircraft also comes with the ability to save and load panel states. It comes with some default states like cold and dark, ready on the apron, ready for taxi, etc. When you load the aircraft in the sim, it will load a panel state that corresponds with that position in the sim. So if you start on a runway, it's going to be starting in ready for takeoff. If you start at the gate, it's going to start in some sort of apron mode. If you start in the air, the cockpit state already loads. in a flyable configuration. Alright, so there's a lot of options you can choose here. You can also, what is new, select a default startup state, so you can kind of customize your aircraft. If you're some person that always starts at the gate, you can just customize your aircraft and save the panel state and then use that panel state on every single startup. Okay, so the aircraft always looks the same every single startup. And with that, it also saves things like the temperature of the engines, temperature of the oil, pressure. Also any external vehicles that you've set and saved in that panel state will then be loaded every startup. Now again, there's a video on the PMDG YouTube channel covering this a little bit more detail on how to save panel states, how to save flights, etc. Now a few remarks about the customization process that I don't really like at the moment. There's no key commands. There is an entry for that in the manual. Kind of makes you wonder where they got that from, whether they just copied that from the NGXu manual or whether it's something that they will include in the future but they just didn't yet. Key commands are very essential to me. You can just set up keyboards or joysticks using FICU IPC in order to control certain functions in the cockpit. I think this is again an simulator limitations that a SOBO needs to fix. But they should have been a bit more clear about that there are no key commands as of yet. So if you want to set commands, there are a lot more options in Microsoft Flight Simulator itself, but there's also no clear list of what is linked to what. For example, there's no accurate autopilot disengage switch in Microsoft Flight Simulator, because if you press it again, it will engage the autopilot, which is not realistic. So you have to use the autopilot off mode, which is also not really the same as an autopilot disengage switch on the real yoke. Little things like that, or I haven't been able to, for example, find the fuel cutoff switches inside the Microsoft Flight Simulator button settings, and which one of them would correspond to the fuel cutoff switches in the 737. So it's really hard to kind of set up buttons this way. I really do hope they add the key commands menu in the flight management system, so you can just configure that yourself. Another thing that especially prepared users might not like, and people that have home cockpits and complex setups with multiple monitors, there are no 2D pop-out panels. So on the NGXu, for example, you can just click on the FMC, it will pop out, or certain displays are able to pop out. That's unfortunately not possible in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Maybe they're gonna work on that and fix that in the future, but for now you cannot do pop-out panels. So you really are going to be flying this airplane from within the virtual cockpit, not using 2D panels. Of course, you can set up custom cameras within the sim in order to go to a certain view very quickly, but it's not the same as a 2D panel. So that's a bit of a pity for some people. They might not like that. So let's start exploring the flight management system and the automation of the aircraft in a bit more detail, and the best way to probably do this is of course by just making a full flight. So I've set up a full flight from Schiphol Amsterdam Airport in the Netherlands to Edinburgh Airport in Scotland, and we're just going to take the 737-700 to that destination and kind of explore the systems along the way. Now again, in general, I can just say here it's a PMDG aircraft. The automation and the flight management system is simulated with great accuracy and detail. I think if you watch some of the real-world 737 pilots streams, you will actually notice that they will say the same thing, maybe some little bit of tweaking here and there, but in general it's a very nice and realistic simulation of what the 737 would do in real life. Alright, so you can definitely will have a nice experience exploring this aircraft as you fly your routes. So basically what that means, things like LNAV and VNAV and the calculations that are being made by the flight management systems are very accurate. Even things that the Boeing 737 doesn't do well in real life are simulated. So again, automation is not always perfect, so also that is kind of implemented into the aircraft. And so I'm just setting up a flight and we'll just take a look at what we'll find out. Now of course, when you are setting up the aircraft, you can through the FS Actions menu load it up with fuel and payload. It's not advisable to do that using the default Microsoft Flight Simulator fuel and payload system. Just make sure you do it via the flight management computer right here. So if you make a flight plan using SimBrief, you can just use the weights from that flight plan, enter that into the aircraft so that the weights are accurately incorporated into the VNAV calculations. Of course, it's very important for your profile. And then when you start programming the flight management system, you will just be able to program it like you're used to if you're flying this bird and prepared. It will be very familiar, and then you just start to initialize your flight by setting up your route, or also setting up the performance initialization. Now in regards to your route, there's an option to upload your route through the ACAR system by creating a flight plan using SimBrief. There's a chapter in the manual explaining how to export a SimBrief flight plan to the PMDG folder, and if it's stored in the right PMDG folder, then you can load that route via the flight management system. And when you've done that, from there you can of course program the runway, program your SIDS and stars, and finish up your route that way. Now when you're used to flying the Boeing 737 in prepared, of course you were very used to use active sky and then upload winds using the wind uplink. Now that's still possible. You can also export a weather file in the SimBrief downloader. There are again instructions for that in the PMDG manual. But the problem with that is that of course that those winds forecasts are just from one point in time. Alright, if you use active sky, you can basically constantly update the winds for your en route flights based on the latest weather data and latest weather forecasts. But unfortunately we don't have that option right here. I'm kind of advocating here for maybe some sort of active sky light version, which maybe can just generate such weather file to have at least a little bit more accurate forecast, even though it might not strictly be the same type of weather as Meteo Blue supplies to Microsoft Flight Simulator. But yeah, it's a bit of an issue. Of course, what you can do right now is just throughout your flight, especially if it's a long one, generate new flight plans using SimBrief so that you have an updated weather file each and every time, and that you can use the latest forecast. But that's a bit cumbersome. For now, the basic workaround is just to use the weather that comes with your original flight plan. But yeah, that's only a pity. Of course, you can also load the weather in your descent forecast in your VNAV descent page, so that also comes with that weather file, so that works very well. And other than that, you can just program the FMS just fine. All the VNAV pages are there. You can really set up the fixed pages. You can just do everything basically what you would expect to be possible in the Boeing 737 FMS. So yeah, in general it just works fine. So just as an example, here's the navigation display. Of course, like the real aircraft, you can just set up the navigation display in any way you want. You can view the route, the map and the plan mode, the VOR mode. You can show airports and waypoints, any fixes that you've entered in a fix page with a particular radial and distance from a fix or a station. You can actually view there. So yeah, you can just set it up the way you want, making sure that you have all the information displayed in front of you in order to carry out your flight safely. So again, I'm just setting up the aircraft and starting up the engines while pushing back. As you can see, using toolbar pushback, set up a little bit of a more complex pushback procedures, and it did it just fine. By the way, if you want to use the PMDG pushback truck, you can actually drive it yourself, but I think this is the most easy option so that you can start the engines while the aircraft is pushing back. So let's take a listen to the engines as they start up. I think the sounds are very cool indeed. I kind of forgot to put on a fuel switch here, but yeah, it will be okay. So as you can see, just like the real thing, it performs well. The engine start went well. Yeah, it just all works like the real aircraft, alright? So the pushback is completed. Let's talk a little bit about taxiing. Now, taxiing the aircraft is a bit of a tricky business in regards to how you set that up. I'm using a rudder pedals, but also a separate joystick as a steering tiller. But you can actually set an axis in the Microsoft Flight Simulator options in order to use the steering tiller, okay? So it's the prop 1 axis. You have to go to the flight management system in the simulation options in order to make sure that and set the aircraft to that option. And when you've done that, you can actually set the prop 1 axis to an axis of your choice, so you can use the steering tiller inside the aircraft. Alright, taxiing itself using the tiller function or even the rudder pedals is fine. It might be a bit sensitive. The rudder is input and yaw axis in Microsoft Flight Simulator in general is just very sensitive, but if you kind of set up the sensitivity controls properly, adjust it to your liking, you can really taxi this aircraft just fine. And the way it kind of moves and the way the ground friction model works in Microsoft Flight Simulator together with the PMDG 737 feels very genuine. In other simulators sometimes the aircraft just starts moving way too easily, but here you can really feel and that you're steering a heavy aircraft, and it takes a little while for the engines to spool up and then get moving the aircraft, but once you're moving, the aircraft will usually kind of keep moving, so that's quite realistic, and taxiing like this is great fun. So we are approaching the runway. Let's just take a look at the takeoff. I'm not going to talk during the takeoff, so you can just enjoy the sounds. So I've set up the takeoff. I set up a toga button. Luckily the toga function is in the Microsoft Flight Simulator control options, and we'll just take off, and as you can see it will the flight director will follow the LNAV procedure. Now, two things. I kind of had an issue with one of my joystick axes that was kind of conflicting with my yoke, so at some point I kind of struggled with my yoke input. And another issue is that I was not able to engage VNAV properly. Apparently I forgot to execute one of the VNAV pages. I'm not sure really why, but once I did that, VNAV did engage, and then after that you will see me engage the autopilot, and aircraft will follow the LNAV and VNAV profile just fine. So enjoy the takeoff for now, keeping that in mind. You will see how the aircraft behaves, and again, the whole immersion during takeoff is just amazing, together with the sounds, the way the displays look, the way the sim itself looks. You will really enjoy your time with this aircraft. So as you can see, we're climbing out of the Berkey to Sarah departure out of Amsterdam, the SID, and as you can see, the automation is just following it perfectly. Even though there are some quite high winds at altitude right here in this weather situation, it's using live weather. As you can see, the autopilot compensates for the crosswind component well, following the track it's supposed to fly. The VNAV system works nice. The speed bug is kind of switching back and forth between two speeds there. I'm not really sure why it's doing that. Maybe the real aircraft does that sometimes as well, but it's not a big deal. In general, the aircraft just flies and behaves very nicely. It's not like one of the default Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, which are kind of clunky and have weird automation systems. This aircraft, it really flies like a PMDG aircraft, like you would expect it to be, and the automation behaves in the same way. And that's just very nice, especially if you're coming from prepared. Everything will just look and feel very familiar, especially in regards to setting up the automation and using the automation. So we are about to approach the top of climb. It calculates it very accurately. As you can see, we're leveling off here at flight level 380, just about at the same point where the top of climb is calculated and where the green arc set at flight level 380 ends. So this just kind of shows you that at least for the departure the VNAV calculation is correct, and it takes into account the winds, your performance, your weight, everything is just taken care of. And we will now continue our route onwards to Edinburgh. So right here I'm just preparing for the approach a bit, setting up the ILS frequency and the nav radio, setting the course, setting up the arrival, the approach speed with the wind correction and stuff like that. I mean, it all just operates like the real 737. There's not much to say about it. You can review your approach here on the navigation display and kind of see what it looks like. We're going to be flying a nice approach with some high winds, so that's going to be quite challenging. A nice DME arc, basically, using the LNAV feature. We're going to be flying that, and then we'll pretty much just follow the VNAV profile, fly the ILS. Actually, should be ending up quite nicely on the ILS, and then we'll see how the autopilot performs the ILS approach itself. So while we're cruising, you can enjoy some of the views again out of the passenger cabin, and it just looks amazing. It feels good to go back to the passenger cabin every once in a while during cruise time to enjoy the views, because they're just very realistic. And this way you will definitely enjoy your flights flying the PMDG 737 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So, fasten your seatbelts, it's about time to descend. We are reaching our top of descent, as you can see on the navigation display. And it just follows the profile very nicely, actually. Even though the winds were very high in this situation. Actually, the flight management system calculated the VNAV path accurately. It actually followed the VNAV profile very well throughout. As you can see, we have a restriction at this waypoint. What is it called? Cockpit, flight level 260. So let's take a look at how it passes that waypoint. And as you can see, it does a pretty nice job. Not perfect, and again, automation is not perfect in real life. Still kind of have to keep an eye on it just to check whether such restrictions are actually being made. But other than that, as you can also just see on the VNAV profile deviation indicator, during this relatively smooth descent without too much turbulence, it did a fine job following the calculated VNAV profile as you would expect from a Boeing 737. Now, I did find that at some points during the flight, during certain VNAV modes, the pitch, the nose of the airplane kind of had a tendency to bounce a little bit, trying to kind of find a value that it wanted to stay at. It was not a huge deal, it was not like a huge deviation, but it's just a little bit noticeable, especially with the camera system of Microsoft Flight Simulator. In the end, that sorted itself out though, and the aircraft just continued its descent according to the profile just fine. So we're now on the DME arc, using LNAV data of course, but still it follows it nicely, even though the wind conditions were quite harsh here in Edinburgh. Also together with the VNAV profile. Later on I switched to a little bit more manual modes of automation, just to get some nice smooth transition onto the ILS. And switching to vertical speed, and then we'll capture the ILS using the approach mode. Now on short final, it did have a bit of trouble following the ILS signal right here as I reduced the speed to final approach speed. Not really sure why, I'm not sure in what sense that realistic that is. It should be able to keep up the ILS signal quite accurately, especially at this stage. It kind of sunk below it at some point. But yeah, it's just one scene. And other tries that I've tried, it actually just performed fine. But yeah, it's good to keep an eye on that. Again, here and there the automation system needs a little bit of tweaking, but knowing PMDG, they will just do that, and we'll listen to the feedback, especially from real-world 737 pilots. And yeah, let's take a look at the landing. You can see that I'm floating quite a bit on this landing. It is a bit getting used to the new flight dynamics, as we'll discuss a little bit later. But yeah, just enjoy the landing, enjoy the views and the sounds and how the aircraft performs.
Minimums. $100, $50, $40, $30, 20, 10,
So, welcome to Edinburgh Airport. We have safely landed. Now, as you can hopefully see overall during this little example, you can see that the aircraft just performs fine. Any tweaks that need to be made will very likely be fixed over time by PMDG as the other variants are going to get released. And overall, despite some of the things that are lacking still, I mean, you will have a great time flying this aircraft, exploring the world in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Especially with the smaller variants of the 737. You can visit many different airports with short runways, with exciting approaches, with, you can fly to large cities. There's so many possibilities to explore out there with this aircraft. So it's definitely something that you will enjoy. I'm very sure about that. So let's talk a little bit about the flight dynamics, and this is of course very important because it's a new simulator. Microsoft Flight Simulator uses its own flight model system. It's quite advanced. A lot more dynamics are involved, and it's of course way different from the one that we're used to in Prepared, and it's also different from the one in X-Plane. In general, I have to say though that the manual flying in the 737 is very, very nice. I expected it a little bit worse looking at one of the, some of the default aircraft like the default Boeings or even the Aerosoft CRJ can feel a bit wobbly and clunky at times. It's kind of hard to explain. But in general, I found that flying and steering the 737 is very nice. And the way I do that usually is just to take off the airplane from some random location, get it to a certain altitude, and just, without any configuration at all, just fly the airplane, just feel what it does, make some very rough inputs. It's a simulator, you can do that. Make some very rough inputs and just feel what the aircraft is doing. And just make some nice turns and do some stalls, as you can see right here. I'm just practicing a stall at altitude, just to kind of see how the airplane behaves. And yeah, if you're coming from Prepared, it's definitely an improvement. But at the same time, it's something to get used to. You feel that the aircraft takes more work to fly, but the Boeing 737 in real life is a very difficult airplane to fly and to land, from what I know and from what I've heard in real life. So in many cases, I think it's just a matter of getting used to, especially if you come from Prepared, where flying the aircraft was relatively easy. In this new Microsoft Flight Simulator, the dynamics are just different. One thing I do have to say though is that flying on short final and landing the aircraft does feel a bit wobbly. Unfortunately, that's just a thing that's happening in Microsoft Flight Simulator with any aircraft. Steering on the ground after landing, the wings get kind of wobbly. It feels like the aircraft is not very stable on the ground, and you have to use very little rudder inputs in order to keep the nose on the center line, which is quite realistic because in real life it's more about giving a certain force on the rudder pedals and on the controls instead of a certain input. Of course, most of us are not flying with very expensive hardware, so it's really just about also setting your sensitivity settings. But in general, I really feel that it is a bit too wobbly, a bit too clunky on the runway and in some short final conditions somehow. So I think this is more of a Microsoft Flight Simulator problem that needs to be fixed in general. Other than that, flying the airplane is just a joy. It's also, things like having to really put some crosswind correction in during takeoff, as the one of the wings gets lifted up. Those are just dynamics that you did not really feel and prepared before, but now in Microsoft Flight Simulator you do. So the hand flying is just very nice. You can watch my first landing right here, and maybe some other landings as well. My first landing right here at Payne Field. Yeah, pretty good. I was quite happy with that. And if you do make a good landing with this aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator, I'm sure it will put a smile on your face. Because with the frame rates, the performance, and we'll discuss a little bit later, it's just very easy to fly, even in low frame rate conditions. And just the general atmosphere again in the cockpit as you land and come in to fly into the airport. Sometimes only that already kind of makes you forget about some of the tweaks that still need to be done, and you will just enjoy that experience very much. Now, just a small word on performance. I think that what you've seen from the footage, you can be very much surprised. The airplane performs really well in terms of frames per second. If I fly from larger default airports like Amsterdam, the frames never go below 50. If I fly in some heavier scenarios, they never go below, I don't know, 40, maybe sometimes below that, just hitting 35. But in general, especially if you're flying to smaller airports, you will definitely feel that this aircraft is very well stabilized in the sim, so to speak. It's such a contrast to prepared, where if you would get lower frame rates, the sim would get very stuttery very quickly. But in Microsoft Flight Simulator, that's definitely not the case. You can really feel the difference here. That even when the frames do get a little bit lower, you have no problem in controlling the aircraft, panning around. The displays are smooth. It's just incredible. You really get a huge bang for your buck, especially if you are just utilizing a modern graphics card. It will be no problem to run this aircraft at all. Make sure you check out the minimum requirements on the PMDG website, of course. But in terms of performance, it really also depends on your settings, of course, inside Microsoft Flight Simulator. My personal advice would be do not set your settings too high. Do not push landmarks and terrain data to its limits. You don't really need that when you're flying IFR. Try to kind of reduce that a little bit in order to save as much as possible frame rates. And if you do that, then you will have no problem with running this aircraft. It's really, really performing very smoothly. Fooled you there. That was real world footage. Now I would like to dedicate a specific part of this video to talk about the sounds of the PMDG 737 add-on. In general, they did a very nice job at recreating some of the sounds. You can listen to some of the sounds here of the switches inside the cockpit. But also the engine sounds from the cockpit are very nice and accurate, I think. Especially, for example, when you gain altitude, you really hear the sound of the engines kind of fading away in the background, while the sound of the wind on the windscreen of the cockpit increases, like it does in real life. And by the time you get to lower altitudes, the engines themselves are playing a more dominant role in the entire sound atmosphere. What I also really like is the rumbling sound of the engine during startup, as you may have heard earlier in the video. But also in certain flight phases where you're kind of cruising or starting the descent and the engine goes back to flight idle. It goes around 60% N1. You really have a very nice deep rumble sound. And if you have a subwoofer, you will definitely hear that very accurately. And if you're ever flown in a 737, you can really feel, you can really hear and feel that deep rumble of the engine as it goes to flight idle. So that is very nicely done. Now there are a couple things about the sound that are quite unfortunate. There's still no surround sound, and that's really quite surprising to me. A lot of aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator, especially the default ones, actually come with surround sound, and that really adds to the immersion again. Maybe it's because the sound package is so extensive, but it would have been really nice to really get accurate sounds in a 3D environment. With that, if you go into the cabin, there are not really truly cabin sounds. You do hear the different engine sounds, but depending on your position in relation to the engines, but it's not really a cabin feeling like you get, for example, in the freeware fly-by-wire Airbus. Another little issue is that there's the trim wheels during takeoff. They kind of keeps spinning around. It's normal for the 737 to trim during certain phases of flight, but it seems like the trim sound file is playing when it should not be playing. But this is a small issue that probably will be fixed. And yeah, that's kind of something they have to work on. But in general, the sounds are just amazing. I mean, you've heard a couple of them right now, and I think you can decide for yourself that in general you will truly feel like you're flying a 737. Let's talk also about icing. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator by default also comes with a nice icing system. And it's rather strange that I did not find anything about this in the tutorial documentation or the introduction documentation. So what I did, I just opened up the developer mode in Microsoft Flight Simulator and added ice, and the ice does actually appear on the airframe, which is really nice. It's something you cannot do in Prepared. You actually see ice on the nose, on the wing edges. I suppose if you have the proper de-ice equipment on, it should also disappear. But you can actually really see where all the ice accumulates on the surfaces of the aircraft, where in reality it would also accumulate. Also, if you sit in the cockpit, you can see the same icing effects. You can see it on the windscreen, and the areas that are warmed by the windshield heaters should keep kind of clear. And you can also see it on the wipers, which is really nice. So it's something that they use to assess whether there's ice on the wing. So that's quite nice, but it's rather confusing whether and how Prepared or PMDG uses this. As you can see, there's a kind of an option in the payload section which has icing. It has a certain value, but it does not really correspond to the value that you set in the developer mode. So it's really confusing to me as to how that works. When you do set icing, you can definitely feel that the aircraft has less aerodynamic smoothness, so to speak. So you can see that the engines will produce a higher N1 value, and the nose will pitch up more to compensate for the loss of lift. And when you remove the icing again, it returns to more normal values. So icing does have an effect, but the way PMDG really simulates this and how the anti-ice systems really play into this, I think deserves a bit more attention in the documentation. And speaking of documentation, as we wrap this review to end, in the community folder, in the PMDG folder, if you look carefully, you can find the documentation. There's an introduction manual and a tutorial. The tutorial will just get you through a full flight, and the introduction will just kind of introduce you to the airplane and discuss how to use it in Microsoft Flight Simulator, because it's a new simulator, it's a different simulator, and it requires some work from your side to not mess things up. So if you're really new to the 737, you will have some time to spend with this documentation in order to learn how to fly the airplane at least a little bit. What is a bit disappointing, and I think that has to do something with Boeing licensing stuff, is that there is no more flight crew operation manual, no more QRH. Those kind of documents are really big, and they used to come with PMDG aircraft where you could really extensively learn how to fly the 737. Unfortunately, that is not part of the documentation anymore. It used to be hundreds and hundreds of pages worth of information on how to operate the aircraft. So unfortunately, that type of documentation, more official documentation, is not available anymore. But of course, if you look well on the internet, you can find QRHs and FCOMs of different airlines out there, so you can use that as well. But yeah, just the documentation is not as extensive as it used to be. Now finally, let's also take a look at the operations center. As you can see right here, I've already talked about it a bit. You can install liveries here, you can adjust the liveries, you can install it from the official section, some official liveries, but if you download liveries here, you can also install them using this utility. And yeah, it's quite straightforward. If you have any updates of the aircraft, you will also see that here in the PMDG Operations Center. So make sure that you keep an eye on the forums and open this program every once in a while to get updates for your aircraft. Right, so let's start to put a conclusion to this review of the PMDG Boeing 737 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. I think you and me can both see that it is a fantastic add-on. It really looks beautiful. It makes use of all the things that are available in the new graphics engine of Microsoft Flight Simulator. making this aircraft look so and so much better than it looked ever before in older simulators like Prepared or even FSX. Yeah, just amazing, really. It's of course yet again another 737, and although I was not really impressed with the upgrade to the NGXu in Prepared, this upgrade I am really excited about, because it's in a new simulator that looks so much better, that has so much more graphic realism, that has so much more better representation of how the sky really looks, how clouds really look, how the lighting and the sim really looks, and that's just amazing. You can see both the exterior and the interior of the aircraft look absolutely very nice, especially the interior, of course, with the cockpit in different settings, whether it's raining or bright outside, whether it's day or night. In any setting you will really enjoy your experience. You really feel like you're immersed inside the simulator with this airliner. It feels just so realistic. The movement of the knobs and switches, just the way everything looks, is perfect. In terms of systems, again, yeah, in general it's fine. It's a PMDG aircraft, which represents the Boeing 737 very realistically. Of course, there's some little tweaks that need to be done to the automation here and there, perhaps. But in general, it's just very fine. You will have a very pleasant experience. The flying characteristics are just beautiful. Only during landing it's still a bit too sensitive, but that's something Microsoft Flight Simulator probably has to fix. And yeah, in general, it's definitely worth the money. If you're coming from Prepared, you will miss things like the EFB and the weather radar, but I would say just try it, give it some time. It takes time to get used to a new simulator, it takes time to get used to a new aircraft in a new simulator, but it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. You will feel that it's different, that it's harder to land the airplane, but I think that's worth it in the end. Now there are of course some negatives like the missing EFB, the missing weather radar, missing key commands. These are all things that are a bit disappointing that they were not there on release, given that other developers are able to do that, even freeware developers. So yeah, I hope they will soon fix that. Some other small things like the trim sounds during takeoff, that the windows cannot open. You know, those are all kinds of things that, yeah, it needs to be worked on. But I'm sure PMDG will fix that. PMDG is a company well known for fixing stuff like that pretty quickly. Just leave your feedback on the forums if you have any technical issues or crashes or things that you find out. Make sure you share your feedback on the forum so that they can work on it. And I think, and I'm sure that over time this aircraft that's already amazing will improve over time. And then there are some general Microsoft Flight Simulator things that are still missing, that if you're coming from Prepared again, that you might not really like the winds in live weather are not always that accurate, especially wind gusts are not always very present. In live weather there are no seasons, you know. It's getting there. There's just some annoying things, but let me tell you, I've really been flying with Prepared a lot and really stuck to Prepared for a long time. But now that I've tried 737 in MSFS, I should say, those things don't really matter to me anymore. I really like flying this aircraft in the new simulator, and I'm sure you will do as well. So that wraps up this review of the PMDG Boeing 737 here on the Aviation Pro channel. Stay tuned for the other variants coming in this summer, and I hope to actually take this aircraft out for a vet sim flight soon. And yeah, I hope you will just enjoy the aircraft. Make sure that you leave your comments below on what you think about it. I would definitely be interested in hearing your feedback. For now, thanks for watching, and enjoy flying the 737, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.